Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a book battle. Hey Book Dragons, welcome back to my channel. I'm doing something a little bit different today. I'm doing a book battle video. That's right, I picked two books. We're going to do a book battle between the two of them. And I got this idea from Book Invasion. So if you haven't checked out Book Invasion, you really need to. He's got a great channel and I really enjoyed his version of this. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun doing this. Before we get started, please make sure to like, subscribe, join my Discord if you want to talk with me and my other friends about all things book related, specifically maybe even these books that I'm going to talk about today. And with that being said, let's get right to it. You saw in the thumbnail, I'm sure, what books I am putting up for the battle, and that is Dune versus Hyperion. That's right, Dune versus Hyperion. Now, little caveat on this. Of course, Dune is a standalone novel. Hyperion, on the other hand, is this is a duology, Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion together. I'm doing it this way because it's one complete story if you read them both together. If you only read Hyperion, you're not getting the full story. Whereas with Dune, you're pretty much getting a full story, even though it obviously continues. So I'm going to be pitting these two bad boys against each other, and we're going to see how they measure up. Now, for this, I've come up with a few categories, and I'm going to let you know right up front what those categories are, okay? And the first one is plot. We're going to do pacing, characters, world building, prose, themes, the ending, the overall story, and my overall enjoyment of the book. So those are the 9 categories that I put together for this book battle. And I'm going to rank the books out of 5 points, 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. By the end of this, there's a total of 45 points possible, and we'll see how these guys measure up, okay? So here we go. Starting with the plot. So the plot of Dune is Paul Atreides grows up on his homeworld of Caladan, lots of oceans, lots of different fauna, lots of different scenic locations that he can access, and his family moves to the desert world of Arrakis, also known as Dune, because his father has taken up the fiefdom there. And as we progress throughout Paul's journey, he learns about the Fremen. He learns about the prophecies of the super being, the Kwisatz Haderach, and he learns about his role in fulfilling this prophecy. And it takes place basically in 2 different epochs of time. Paul, as he arrives on Dune and gets to know the area and the people and becomes a part of the Fremen. Then later on, we see him starting to begin his rule as Muad'Dib, as the king over these people, the god over these people, essentially. So that's the plot of Dune. The plot of Hyperion is that you are following 7 different individuals, really only 6, but there is a 7th individual to start off with. And each of these individuals is on a pilgrimage to visit this mysterious time-traveling being known as the Shrike, in its habitat known as the Time Tombs. Everything that has gone wrong in their lives has brought them to this point of desperation where they hope to ask a boon from the Shrike, and there's the chance that the Shrike may just kill them outright or he may grant the boon. And so each of these individuals tells their story throughout the course of this pilgrimage and they each have their own hidden desires. They each have their own secrets that they're trying to keep from each other. There's things that they don't want brought into the light. Each of them shares about their journey, albeit some of it hesitantly. And so there's a poet, and there's a warrior, and a professor, and a private detective, and each of them are on this journey to see the Shrike, and it is just a mind-blowing journey into the psyche of these individuals. So both of these books really have a great plot, but I think Hyperion has a slight edge over Dune when it comes to the plot. The plot of Dune is really, really great, but it's kind of one-dimensional. You know, it's very straightforward, very cut and dried. You know exactly what to expect, whereas the plot of Hyperion is highly nuanced because you're getting all these different perspectives from these different people that make for this very interesting and very human story. So as far as the score for this goes, I am going to give Dune a score of 3, and I am going to give Hyperion a score of 4 for the plot. Now let's talk about pacing. Neither of these books really struggle too much with pacing. Dune progresses a little bit faster. There's more action. There's a lot of political intrigue that moves quite swiftly as you follow the progress of the new empire that they are trying to form. Hyperion takes longer because you're getting in-depth details for each of the individuals that are on the pilgrimage. So it definitely does come at kind of a slower pace compared to Dune. So for this one, Dune scores a 4 and Hyperion scores a 3. Now let's move to the characters. The characters in Dune are really fascinating, especially the character of Paul Atreides, or Paul Muad'Dib. It's really intriguing to watch him grow as a character. Even though you start to see some of the intricate flaws in the character, it's not a flaw in the writing. It is literally a flaw in his character that has come about because not only is he human, but he has been trained as a mentat, and he has been genetically engineered to eventually become this super being. And so with that comes a little bit more of a wooden character, but I think that's really what makes Paul endearing. His mother, the Lady Jessica Atreides, is also a really fascinating character. I really love her. Chani as well, and many of the Fremen are really excellently done. Gurney Halleck, of course, is a wonderful character, and Duncan Idaho. There's really some endearing characters in Dune. However, I don't really feel like the characters in Dune are super nuanced. You don't really see a whole broad range of emotional development and control under crisis. Whereas in Hyperion, you get to know the characters so well that you really feel like you are there with them in their struggles, in their journey, in their painful moments, in their happy moments. You get to learn the things that really make them tick. I just feel like we didn't get to know the characters in Dune as well as we do in Hyperion. And I think that's partly to do with the way the story is structured, and that's fine. There's some great characters in Dune, but it's not necessarily a totally character-driven book, whereas Hyperion, I think, is. We learn so much about these characters in such a short time that by the end of the story, we're not really totally surprised that certain things happened. So for this one, I'm giving the score to Hyperion at a 4, and Dune gets a 3. For world building, again, I think Hyperion wins out on this one. Dune has some amazing world building. Just the grand scope of the planet Arrakis, all the different life forms that reside there, like the sandworms and learning about the politics of the world, and especially learning about House Atreides and House Harkonnen, I think is just a fascinating creation. But for Hyperion, while you're following these pilgrims on their journey, you are getting a window into their worlds as they experience them. So when they're relating the story, they're not just on the ship that they're traveling to the Time Tombs with. We're getting glimpses back into their past and the worlds they grew up on and the families they came from and the people that they loved and the experiences they had. For instance, you get General Kassad's experiences in the war, and it's just a really fascinating world because you get to visit each of these different locations. So I think in terms of the expansiveness of the world building, I think Hyperion is a solid win on this one. So Hyperion gets a 5, and Dune gets 4 on this one. It really is some solid world building. Hyperion just slightly edges it out. So now let's talk prose. This again is a solid win for Hyperion. While the prose of Dune is great, it's very straightforward, it's very easy to read, it's not super complex or anything. The prose in Hyperion is just absolutely gorgeous. Not only is it easy to read, but it really flows, and the words that are used are very intentional and clearly thought out, and they're very picturesque as well. So the writing in Hyperion really paints a picture in your mind of the things that are happening. It's really very evocative at some times. And I think part of that has to do with the poetic nature and the poetic influences of Hyperion. One of the major influences on Hyperion is the writing of John Keats. And so I think that inspiration flows over into the writing itself. And so that is where Hyperion wins out on this one. So for this one, I'm giving Hyperion 4, and Dune gets a score of 3. So now let's talk themes. The main overarching theme in Dune is the corruption of absolute power. So throughout the book, we see Paul starting to come into his power and to start taking control of the Fremen, and the crowd frenzy that erupts as the Fremen learn to love and adore and pretty much worship Paul Atreides is fascinating to watch. It really is. And it develops almost into a cult. That's how strongly they come to follow Paul Atreides. And so that is definitely there. It's an interesting study on the development of cult. And it's just mind-blowing to watch. Another theme, of course, is the theme of overcoming fear. There's the mantra that Paul is taught from a very early age. Fear is the mind killer. It's just really, really fascinating. It's part of his Bene Gesserit training. And so that is part of what makes Paul who he is he has learned to adapt and overcome his fear, so much so that he will go to whatever lengths it takes to achieve his destiny, to achieve his fate. In Hyperion, you get a much more wide variety of themes. There's themes of forgiveness. There's themes of loss and abandonment, especially with the story of Saul, the professor, as he learns to grieve over the potential loss of his daughter and the change of his relationship with his daughter. So you've got all these different themes that play out. You've got some religious themes, especially with the priest's tale, and there's a heavy focus on suffering as the Shrike places his victims onto a tree of spikes to torment them for endless ages. And it also focuses on themes of what consequences we will get because of the actions that our society has taken. And that's ultimately why the Shrike was created, to be a sort of judge, jury, and executioner for the sins of humankind. And so it's just a fascinating dive into these different themes, and I think I have to give this one to Hyperion as well. So for this one, I gave Hyperion a 5, and I gave Dune a 3. Even though I really enjoyed the themes in Dune, obviously I'm a huge fan. Even though I love the themes in Dune and the way it plays out in the story, ultimately Hyperion wins this one. So now let's talk about the ending of the books. The ending of Dune is one of my favorite endings to a book, and it's kind of a weird ending, so to speak. Of course, you have your major battle between Paul Atreides and Feyd-Rautha, and that's just a really great duel. Amazing the way it was choreographed in the book, and then seeing how the book ends and sets up Paul's dynasty, I just think is really fascinating. And then, of course, Hyperion ends up doing what it set out to do. The pilgrims arrive, and they get to have some of their loose ends wrapped up, and it ends up becoming a complete change for the galaxy and the universe as it's currently known in that time period, because there are things that they have to do to prevent history from repeating itself. So Dune was a very character-driven ending, and Hyperion had a very humanity-focused ending to it, and philosophically focused as well. And I personally think that Hyperion wins out on this one too. So I gave Hyperion a 5, and I gave Dune a 3. So now let's come back and let's talk about the overall story. Dune is just a fascinating book from start to finish. Everything fell into place and made sense. The pacing was really good. The plot was phenomenal. I absolutely love the characters. And I can say the same about Hyperion. It's an absolutely fascinating and engaging read, even though it does progress a little bit slower in terms of the story progression. And I think that's where I think Dune has a slight win over Hyperion. So I gave Dune a 5 on this, and Hyperion I gave a score of 4. Hyperion just slightly clunked along in certain spots, and I think it could have picked up the pace a little bit better and moved along, but it told a fully cohesive story. It's an absolute favorite of mine. I really, really enjoy it. So yes, Dune gets 5 and Hyperion gets 4 on this. You're probably seeing a pattern. I didn't give anything here less than a 3. I think 2 and 1 are really just reserved for poorly handled elements of the story, and I didn't find anything in either of these books that I would say was poorly handled or just didn't work for me. So as far as my overall enjoyment, that's our last category. I can't choose, guys. I love both of these books immensely. I could not pick which one I enjoy more. So for this one, I gave each of them a high score, a score of 5 points for enjoyment. Dune is an absolutely fascinating story. It's easily rereadable. I just love it to death. I've already read it twice, and I'm sure I will reread it again at some point in the future. So yeah, it's an absolute favorite of mine, as is Hyperion. I think that this is a story that I will love for the rest of my life. Again, it's very rereadable. I loved all the themes that were explored in it. I loved the characters. In fact, if I had a category of tearjerker, I cried so much in Hyperion. There were heartfelt moments in Dune as well, but I can't really think of anything that just absolutely made me burst into tears like I did in Hyperion. So I guess that's an honorable mention category, but I'm not scoring that one. It just is what it is. So yes, I was really, really drawn into the story with Hyperion as well, and I absolutely love it. So now it's time to add up the scores. Hyperion wins with a score of 39 points versus Dune coming in at 33 points. Now, here's the obvious question that you are going to ask me. Chaz, which one of these is your favorite? Oh, Dune is still my favorite. If there is one that I would choose to pick up over the other, it would be Dune every time. Dune is my number one favorite sci-fi book of all time, currently anyway, but Hyperion is my second favorite sci-fi book of all time, and just barely. Like, if I could keep them in the category of number one sci-fi of all time, if I could have them share that spot, I would, but it's not really realistic. So it is what it is. I've got Dune as my favorite and Hyperion as my second favorite. And even though Hyperion got a higher score in some areas, Dune is still my favorite. And that might be because of nostalgia. Who knows? But I hope you have enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments what you think about the winner and what you thought about this video. Would you like to see more book battles from me in the future? Let me know in the comments below. That would be awesome. And until next time, guys, make sure you're reading more books. If you haven't read these books that I've showcased today, make sure you do that, all right? I'll talk to you soon.